Founded in 1907, the Missouri Valley Conference is Division I's second oldest conference. The Missouri Valley has been around since the ancient times of intercollegiate athletics, and with over a century-long experience of constantly adapting and evolving to the ever-changing landscape of college sports, the Missouri Valley is likely to add a 38th school in its history as a full member. The Missouri Valley is coming off a year as the 9th-ranked conference in the country, and when you go to several Missouri Valley arenas, the deeply embedded basketball culture in their communities and fandom passed through generations are readily apparent. As a college basketball fan who's been to 8 conference tournaments, Arch Madness quickly became my favorite. Between the 12-hour-a-day party atmosphere at the MVC fan party at Ballpark Village and the energy brought by the crowds during the games, the passion and family reunion atmosphere were quickly felt. And now, a long-form deep dive on Missouri Valley Conference expansion. Before we delve into expansion candidates, we should ask, what might make the MVC appealing for other mid-majors? Why might another school find the MVC a good fit for them? That appeal would start with the conference rankings. The Valley has ranked 11, 11, 11, 15, and 9 over the past 5 years. If the Pac-12 dissolves, the MVC will have been a top 10 league 4 of the past 5 years among the 30-plus leagues who would still exist. For a non-FBS school with men's basketball as top priority who cannot get into the Big East, A10, or WCC, the MVC is the highest-ranked league. The MVC is also 10th in average attendance. One carrot the Missouri Valley has to dangle is its championship game TV ratings. In the 2024 championship games, the Missouri Valley ranked 7th in TV ratings with 1.66 million viewers. The MVC final enjoys over-the-air exposure on CBS, and has drawn over 1 million viewers every year but one since CBS picked up the game in 2006. Relative to many other mid-major leagues, the Missouri Valley enjoys solid linear TV visibility. The Valley last year had 5 games on ESPN2, 5 on ESPNU, 8 plus the MVC semifinals on CBS Sports Network plus the final on CBS, 18 games on Bally Sports and NBC Sports Chicago plus the 4 in the MVC first round and another 4 in the MVC quarterfinals, and then 3 Illinois State home games on Marquee. In all, the Valley enjoys 50 games on linear TV, and those are hard to come by for many mid-major leagues. The bottom right is a map showing the MVC's RSN coverage. The blue is what their coverage was before Murray and Belmont joined. So the blue is the coverage from NBC Sports Chicago, Bally Sports Indiana, Midwest, and KC. And then the red is what was added after Murray and Belmont joined in Bally Sports South and Bally Sports Southeast. In total, the MVC's RSN footprint has 13 states. The MVC also offers direct access to Chicago. And with declining enrollments and an incoming enrollment cliff, this has become more important as Chicagoland is the #1 exporter besides the New York and LA metropolitan areas of out-of-state college students. Extending from student recruitment to player recruitment, Chicago was tied for second in most Division I players out of all cities, behind only New York City. The Valley is only one of 5 conferences with a school either in Chicago or adjacent to Chicago like Evanston. Considering the Big Ten, Big East, and A10 are unattainable for the vast majority of Midwestern mid-majors, and then the NEC is a bottom-rung D1 conference on the East Coast, that means that the MVC is the only avenue for access to Chicago. The Missouri Valley has enjoyed some high-profile wins over the years, Since 2010, the MVC has defeated the number one ranked team in the AP poll 3 times, starting with Northern Iowa knocking off number one Kansas in the 2010 NCAA tournament, then Northern Iowa knocking off number one North Carolina in the 2016 season, and finally Evansville knocking off number one Kentucky in the 2020 season. Over the last 10 years, a program who is today in the MVC has won an NCAA tournament game 6 times, starting with Northern Iowa in 2015. They were a 5 seed, ranked number 11 in the AP poll. The Northern Iowa in 2016, they actually beat number 1 North Carolina and number 5 Iowa State in the regular season, won a game in the tournament on a half-court buzzer beater. Then 2019 Murray State drilled the Big East runner-up Marquette by about 20. Belmont in 2019 won a game as an at-large. Drake in 2021 won a game as an at-large. And Murray State in 2022 won a game as a 7th seed. They were ranked number 20 in the AP poll. 5 times in the last 10 years, a program who is currently in the MVC today was either an at-large team or an auto bid who was above the at-large cut line. 2015 Northern Iowa was a 5 seed. 2019 Belmont was an at-large. 2021 Drake was an at-large. 2022 Murray State was a 7 seed. And 2024 Drake was above the at-large cut line on the selection committee's publicly released S-curve. Drake went 4-2 in Q1 games. An important development to keep an eye on soon is expected NCAA tournament expansion to 72 or 76. The Big 12 commissioner, Yormark, is pushing hard for 76. Moreover, additional at-large slots may open if the Pac-12 and or WAC dissolve. So 4 to 10 at-large slots should open soon. And with a widening of the at-large pool, that would mean teams like 2017 Illinois State, who is the second team out, 2020 Northern Iowa, who is projected first 4 out on bracket matrix, and 2024 Indiana State, who is the third team out, would get in the tournament. The MVC might not be a multi-bid league most years, but the legitimate possibility of an at-large exists in the MVC, and that might appeal to a school in a conference where they'll never get an at-large because they just don't have Q1 or Q2 games in conference play. How fluky was Indiana State missing the NCAA tournament this year? It took a historic confluence of anomalies. On the left, you have Bart Torvik calling it the best bubble ever, and on the right, you have a study from John Gassaway. He looked at a 10-year sample size and concluded that there were 1.7 bid thieves per year. So you take that perfect storm of the best bubble ever, and then 5 bid thieves, which was more than 3 than the average. And the selection committee's last 4 in entering Saturday became the first 4 out on Selection Sunday after 4 bid steals on Saturday night. So while Indiana State did not make the tournament this year, it's important to consider the context and the incredible nuance that this year's circumstances brought. Indiana State's profile would make the tournament in the vast majority of years. The selection committee themselves would attest to that, as they slotted Indiana State into the tournament, not anticipating a record-setting number of bid steals that Saturday night. Before we get to the expansion candidates, here are what I believe are the 2 primary drivers of expansion for the MVC presidents. On the left is location. First, for men's basketball recruitment. Later in the video, I'll have a database showing where men's basketball recruits come from and how many from each combined statistical area in each state. And very importantly in this era, student recruitment. Many schools, especially in the Midwest, have faced stagnant or declining enrollment over the past decade due to declining birth rates and population shifts. We'll show some graphs coming up of how those enrollment declines have impacted MVC schools, and then throw in a historic enrollment cliff coming up in 2025 that amplifies those challenges. In response, schools have to get creative to bring in more students via either areas that export a lot of out-of-state students or areas with a lot of alumni that schools can engage and connect with for donations, perhaps also one day enrolling their kids. Now, location isn't the sole driver of expansion. For example, location can be overlooked if a school has a Murray State-like brand. From 2010 to 2022, Murray State had 2 teams ranked in the AP Top 20, 4 years advancing to the round of 32 in the NCAA tournament, and none of those 4 teams were in back-to-back years, so there were 4 different roster cycles. They were a 6 seed and a 7 seed in the NCAA tournament, good enough for an at-large bid if they did not win the auto bid. And Murray State has always had a strong fan base. They average over 5,000 attendance. I've seen firsthand them taking over the OVC tournament in Evansville. Also saw that racer caravan for the NCAA tournament in Indianapolis a few years back. that billboard flashing Murray State-esque candidate does not exist this time, making it extremely unlikely that you'll see a school that has a rural location or not in a decent-sized market getting into the MVC. On the right is what I believe is the other primary driver of expansion, and that is men's basketball. Goes without saying that men's basketball infrastructure has to be in place, budgets, facilities, NIL collectives, big donors are a plus. Basketball brand and success are important because the MVC cannot afford to slip from a top 10, 11 men's basketball conference, as the quality of men's basketball is why the league enjoys visibility like its final on CBS. If the MVC was 15 every year instead of 10 or 11, would CBS keep sub-licensing the championship game from ESPN? Probably not, which is why it's critical for the MVC to add a school that doesn't water down the league's conference metrics. Now, basketball brand and success can be overlooked if the school is in an ideal location and the league feels the infrastructure and commitment are in place for a school to elevate its program. For example, Loyola was 1-17 in the Horizon League 1 year prior to getting into the MVC. Schools located in a low population area with low budgets are probably not realistic candidates, even if they're good at men's basketball like Morehead State or located in Missouri like SEMO. Morehead State is a very good team, but they're located in a town of 7,000. Their athletic revenues are 350th in the EADA database, and their men's basketball expenses are 313th. Some people might jump to SEMO as a logical replacement for a team in Missouri, but SEMO is located in the number 367 metropolitan area. They're 305th in athletic revenues in the EADA database, and their men's basketball expenses are 315th. Here are the schools we'll evaluate. There's going to be a limit of 19 due to a cap on how many rows and columns fit on a page. So we'll take the previous finalists in the previous rounds of expansion. Milwaukee and Omaha were finalists in 2017. UT Arlington and UMKC were finalists the last time. Then 3 schools mentioned by extra points: Central Arkansas, Little Rock, and Northern Kentucky. Then we'll throw in 6 privates as the MVC has 5: Denver, St. Thomas, Oral Roberts, Lindenwood, Bellarmine, and Detroit. Add South Dakota State, even though they're out of the footprint because they're always really good, followed by a program who's often good with historically strong attendance in Wright State. Then Oakland, who's in a good market coming off an NCAA tournament win. And that brings us up to 16 schools to fill the last 3 spots. We'll go with 3 schools who are nearby and not located in an MVC city. They are Austin Peay, Eastern Kentucky, and Green Bay. The first criteria we'll cover is how enrollment trends in the enrollment cliff might play a role in the MVC president's decision. Population shifts and declining birth rates have taken a toll on a lot of schools nationwide, and a lot of the MVC schools are no exception to that. UNI has lost 31% of its enrollment over 13 years, Drake 20% over 15. UIC has grown by 20% over 10 years. Illinois State has gained 0.9% over 8 years. Bradley lost 11.3% over 5 years. Southern has lost 45% over 15 years. Valparaiso has lost 37% over 8 years. Indiana State 36% over 5 years. Evansville 20% over 5 years. Murray State 10% over 8 years. And Belmont has grown by 20% over 8 years. So to put all that in visual form, you have 2 schools that have been booming in Belmont and UIC, 1 school that's basically stayed the same in Illinois State, and then 8 schools who have been experiencing declines in Murray, Bradley, Evansville, Drake, UNI, Indiana State, Valpo, and Southern. With UNI, you can see how the declining Midwestern demographics have hurt them a bit, as looking at their 10-year trend with new freshmen from the state of Iowa have declined by 10%, while new freshmen from out of state have increased by 3%. That effect is even more profound in looking at the 10-year trend with their undergraduate students, as Iowa undergraduate students have declined by 25% at UNI, while undergraduate out-of-state students have increased by 0.7%. So UNI shows the importance of targeting more out-of-state freshmen and undergraduates to compensate for the loss in in-state students. This map shows the 2-year population shifts at the county level from 2020 to 2022, and Cook County lost 2.9% of its population over 2 years, while the state of Illinois lost 1.6% of its population. Cook County losing population impacts many MVC schools, as Chicagoland is a massive pipeline for tuition-paying students. Looking at the ISU Factbook in 2019, that was the most recent one I could find, ISU's enrollment has held steady. However, given 97.2% of ISU's undergraduates were from in-state in Illinois, and Illinois has since lost 1.6% of its population from 20 to 22, and these numbers are from 2019, ISU might target underutilized states who export out-of-state students in large numbers to compensate. Then look at the Bradley University Statistical Profile in 2023. Cook County accounts for 25.7% of Bradley's in-state undergraduate students and 22.1% of Bradley's U.S. undergraduate students. And with Cook County losing nearly 3% of its population over 2 years, schools like Bradley will look for different pipelines. The state of Illinois accounts for 85.8% of Bradley's U.S. undergraduate students, and of course, the state of Illinois lost 1.6% of its population over 2 years. Bradley's top states for out-of-state students are Missouri, Indiana, Wisconsin, Texas, Iowa, and Minnesota. Of course, Milwaukee is in Wisconsin, UTA is in Texas, and St. Thomas is in Minnesota. Now, Southern Illinois, 78.5% of SIU students are from in-state, and of course, Illinois lost 1.6% of its population from 2020 to 2022. SIU's top out-of-state feeders are Missouri, Indiana, California, Florida, Tennessee. Those are the top 5, and then the top 10 are Texas, Kentucky, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Georgia. Now, SIU is the MVC school you can see where demographic shifts have hurt the school the most. As SIU's 15-year trend, looking at their 2008 fact book and their 2023 fact book, the number of SIU students from Illinois have dropped by 50.5% over those 15 years, while the number of their students from Cook County have dropped by 56.2% over those 15 years. Now looking at Indiana State's enrollment summaries from 2018 and 2023, in their 5-year trend, ISU saw a 41.4% decline in in-state undergraduate students and a 37% decline in Illinois undergraduate students. Now, if we look strictly at undergraduate full-time enrollment, so we're taking away total enrollment, we're only focusing on undergraduate full-time enrollment, and these numbers are from the Department of Education. Since 2010, Northern Iowa lost 32.5%, Drake lost 17.2%, UIC increased by 26%, ISU, Illinois State remained pretty much the same, Bradley lost 16%, SIU lost 49.5%, Valpo lost 13.8%, Indiana State lost over 30%, Evansville lost 43%, Murray lost 13.8%, the same as Valpo, and Belmont increased by 66%. And here are those undergraduate full-time enrollment trends since 2010 in graph form. Belmont is exploding, UIC is also exploding, Illinois State's pretty much the same, and then everyone else lost between 13% and 50%. Now, those are the trends before you factor in a historic enrollment cliff coming up. From 2025 to 2029, there's going to be a 15% decline in 18-year-old college-going students. So a lot of these university presidents, where one of their primary job functions is enrollment, they can see the storm clouds coming with this enrollment cliff. And that might influence how they approach conference realignment and which schools they bring into their conference. To combat those enrollment storms, schools are looking towards out-of-state pipelines. And these are the number of college-going students each state exports out of state. On the chart on the left, you're looking at the out-migration column. The states highlighted in green are in the MVC footprint, and then the states highlighted in yellow could be relevant in terms of the schools the MVC looks at. Obviously, Illinois is just bleeding in terms of their high school graduates going to other states. The number 5 state in exporting out-of-state college students is Texas. And considering this data is from 2018, Texas may have risen up to number 4 and number 3 by now. Then you can see Minnesota at 12, Ohio at 13, Colorado at 17, Michigan 18, Missouri 19, Wisconsin 20, Oklahoma at 32, Arkansas 35, Nebraska 38, South Dakota 47, and North Dakota 49. Now, if you convert those numbers into percentages, Illinois exports 7% of the country's out-of-state college students. Texas exports 6.2% of the country's out-of-state college students. Minnesota and Ohio are close to 3%. Colorado, Michigan, Missouri, and Wisconsin all hover around 2%. Oklahoma's a little under 1%. Arkansas 0.7%, Nebraska 0.6%, then South Dakota, North Dakota 0.3%. So if making your school visible in an area that exports a lot of college students elsewhere is a primary factor for the MVC presidents, that would favor a school like UT Arlington or St. Thomas, who are in the dominant metropolitan areas of their states that are also states that are highly ranked in that regard. Looking at those numbers in graph form, if UT Arlington gets into the MVC, it'll be on the back of this, while also checking the boxes of the other criteria. But grabbing college students from DFW is what's primarily driving UT Arlington's candidacy. Another factor that university presidents look at is their school's alumni distribution, as engaging and connecting with alumni builds relationships that eventually morph into donations to the school or donations to the athletic department, and perhaps those donors' kids one day end up enrolling at the school. Using the Wall Street Journal's Where Graduates Move After College database from 2018, their database has MSP, DFW, St. Louis, Kansas City, Milwaukee, Omaha, and Denver, each with over 1% of Drake alumni. For UNI, they have over 1% of their alumni in MSP, DFW, Kansas City, Omaha, and Denver. Now, UNI's fact book has more detailed information, and it's most recent from this year. Minnesota has over 13% of UNI's out-of-state alumni and 4.5% of all UNI alumni. Illinois has 9.2% of UNI's out-of-state alumni. Texas has 8% of UNI's out-of-state alumni. Colorado 6.7%. Wisconsin 5.9%. For UIC, this database doesn't have 1% of UIC alumni going to the location of any of the schools we're looking at. Over 1% of Illinois State alumni go to DFW, St. Louis, and Denver. 3.3% of Bradley alumni go to St. Louis, while over 1% go to DFW, Milwaukee, and Denver. 1 in 8 Saluki alumni go to the St. Louis area, while over 1% go to DFW and Denver. Over 1% of Valparaiso alumni go to DFW, Milwaukee, St. Louis, Detroit, and Denver. Over 1% of Indiana State alumni go to DFW, Cincinnati, and Louisville. Over 1% of Evansville alumni go to DFW, St. Louis, Cincinnati, Louisville, and Denver. Over 8% of Murray State alumni go to Louisville, while over 1% go to DFW, St. Louis, and Cincinnati. Murray State's fact book from a year ago has more detailed information. It says that 53% of their alumni reside in Kentucky, while 10% in Tennessee, 6.7% in Illinois, 3.7% in Indiana, 3.4% in Missouri, 3% in Florida, and 2% in Texas. Over 1% of Belmont alumni head to DFW. Putting together all of that information, the green boxes are where each location of a school we're looking at houses at least 1% of the alumni of an MVC school. You can see a lot of green boxes for UT Arlington. Overall, 10 of 11 MVC schools have over 1% of their alumni in DFW, while 7 MVC schools have over 1% of their alumni in St. Louis and Denver, and then 3 of them in Milwaukee, Louisville, and Cincinnati, 2 in Omaha, Kansas City, and MSP, and 1 in Detroit. Looking at the Metropolitan Statistical Area rankings and then the 3-year MSA population shift, DFW number 4 MSA has grown by over 6% in 3 years. Detroit is number 14, but has lost 1% of its population. MSP 16, but growing by 0.6%. Denver 19, but growing by about 1.5%. St. Louis 23, but has lost nearly 1%. Cincinnati 30 and has grown by 1%. Kansas City 31 has grown by 1.3%. Milwaukee 40, but has lost nearly 1%. Louisville 43 and slightly growing. Tulsa 54, grown by 3%. Omaha 56, grown by 1.7%. Dayton 76 has stayed exactly the same. Little Rock 80, grown by over 2%. Clarksville 159, grown by 6%. Green Bay 161, grown by 1%. And then Richmond, Kentucky is a micropolitan statistical area. They're 35 minutes from the number 169 MSA in Lexington. And South Dakota State is also in a micropolitan area. They're 1 hour from the number 171 MSA, Sioux Falls. Now, men's basketball recruiting. Looking at this database put together by Andy Witchery on NCAA.com in the 2021-2022 season, on the left are the top 10 cities. Those are not including the suburbs, obviously. And then on the right are the top 10 states in producing Division I players. Now, with their database, you can zoom in and then click on each bubble and see the number of players that came from each town. So I added up the number of players from each town and then researched whether that town was in the proper combined statistical area. And so I came up with how many D1 players belong to each combined statistical area. You had 146 coming from DFW, 67 from Detroit, 60 from Kansas City, 58 from MSP, 49 from Cincy and Dayton. Cincy and Dayton are technically different MSAs, but many geographers believe that it's inevitable they'll be merged, and I agree with that, so I combined them. St. Louis 46, Milwaukee 46, Little Rock 36, Louisville 35, Tulsa 30, Denver 28, Omaha 23. Lexington CSA had 19, Clarksville 8, Green Bay 3, and then South Dakota State is not in a combined statistical area. Now for the bottom row, I was looking at the fertile recruiting grounds, how to measure that for each CSA. I was more so looking at the immediate area within a 70-mile radius, any Division I teams in a 70-mile radius, and then any Power 4 or Big East programs that are located in that state. So combining those two numbers together, and I was dividing the number of CSA D1 players by that number. And the result was MSP has very fertile recruiting grounds because there's only Minnesota and St. Thomas located there. Kansas City was second, and graphing those numbers, which was my method in trying to measure fertile recruiting grounds. MSP, one of the most fertile recruiting grounds in the country. Kansas City was a strong second. Then you had DFW in third, Milwaukee in fourth, and a bunch of other locations, Louisville, St. Louis, Detroit, Little Rock, Omaha, Tulsa, Cincinnati/Dayton, and Denver kind of all bunched together. Now we're looking at men's basketball recruiting by state using that same NCAA.com database. The top row is the state's percentage of U.S. Division I players, and then the bottom row is that state's rank. So Texas produces 8% of U.S. Division I players, and it ranked second. Ohio was 11th, Tennessee 14th, Michigan 16th. Kentucky was tied for 21st with Wisconsin, Minnesota 24th, Missouri 25th, Arkansas 27th, Oklahoma 30th, Nebraska and Colorado tied for 33rd, South Dakota 44th. Now we shift from student recruitment and player recruitment to finances. These are the men's basketball expenses in the EADA database from the 22-23 school year. Milwaukee is 130th, which would be top 3 in the MVC. Detroit 169th, Wright State 172nd, Omaha 173, Denver 175, UMKC 181, Oral Roberts 184. Then just outside the top 200, you have Bellarmine, Northern Kentucky, and UT Arlington. Then Oakland at 227, Little Rock at 236, Austin P, Eastern Kentucky, South Dakota State in the 240s, Green Bay at 261, St. Thomas at 277, but they're transitioning, Central Arkansas all the way back at 328, Lindenwood at 354, they're also transitioning. And here are all the men's basketball budgets color-coded to see where they stand relative to other candidates and relative to MVC schools. Milwaukee's all the way at the top. Schools like Detroit, Wright State, Omaha, Denver, UMKC, Oral Roberts, Bellarmine, and Northern Kentucky, their budgets would fit in the MVC. And then UT Arlington, Oakland, Little Rock, they're a little bit below the MVC. Here is every school's ranking in 10-year KenPom. South Dakota State is 101st. That would be second in the Valley. Wright State, 140th. UT Arlington's in the top 150. Northern Kentucky, 163. Oakland, 166. Oral Roberts, 183. Everyone else is not in the top 220. St. Thomas is 221. However, if you took away their first year transitioning from Division III, then they would be 166. 9 of 11 MVC schools are in the top 161. Evansville is 207 and UIC is 276. Here's a chart color-coded showing everyone in relation to other candidates and everyone in relation to the MVC. South Dakota State would be one of the top performing schools in the Valley. Wright State would be in the top half. UT Arlington would fit, as would Northern Kentucky and Oakland. You could argue St. Thomas if you discount their first year of transitioning. Oral Roberts had some bad years that kind of screwed their average. But then everyone else is quite a bit below the vast majority of the MVC. This is the attendance for the 23-24 season. I manually calculated the average attendance for each school. Oral Roberts had a very strong 5,400 that would rank third in the MVC. Wright State was also strong at over 4,000. You have Northern Kentucky and Eastern Kentucky at over 3,000. And then everyone else was below 3,000. For MVC schools, you had 8 of 11 schools above 3,500. and then 3 schools on the light end. Another color-coded chart showing how everyone is related to the other candidates and related to the MVC schools. Oral Roberts would be one of the top fan bases in the MVC. Wright State would fit in very solidly in the Valley. Now, here are the schools' NCAA tournament bids and wins in the 21st century. South Dakota State has 7. Oral Roberts has 5 with 2 wins. They made the Sweet 16. Milwaukee has 4 bids with 3 wins. Oakland has 4 bids with a win. Northern Kentucky has made 3. Same with Wright State and Eastern Kentucky and Austin Peay. Little Rock has made 2 with 1 win. Green Bay, Detroit, and UT Arlington have made 1. And then everyone else has not made the tournament this century. Now, looking at athletic expenses, in the black and red are their numbers per the EADA database. The EADA database shows all the publics and privates. And then the numbers in blue is from the Knight Commission database. The Knight Commission database is more accurate, but it only shows the publics, not the privates. The first row is their overall athletic expenses. The second row is how much of their athletic expenses are spent on student aid money. And then the third row is what their athletic expenses look like after you subtract that student aid money. And that's the number that I believe is important. So you have Denver at 33 million, then Omaha at 21 million, South Dakota State at 23 million using the Knight Commission. Everyone else would be under 20 million. Of course, it's important to note that these numbers could be inflated if a school plays scholarship football or hockey. For example, Denver and Omaha spend a lot of money on hockey. Schools like South Dakota State, Eastern Kentucky are very committed to football. The next slide is athletic revenues. So the blue is going to be the Knight Commission data, and then the red is going to be the EADA data. Now, the Knight Commission only shows football expenses, not football revenues. So I'm going to substitute football expenses for football revenues, which is not ideal, but those numbers will be similar. That fourth row, AD minus football revenue, is what those numbers look like. Their athletic revenues once you subtract football, which I think is important because you want to compare apples to apples. Now, the numbers are not available for hockey, so I can't subtract that, but ideally I would have subtracted hockey. And Denver obviously has a monster athletic budget. Omaha is high, but that's partially due to hockey. South Dakota State is still high, even after you subtract football. And now the institutional profiles of everyone. First, their ranking in U.S. News. Denver is 124, St. Thomas 163, Detroit 185, UT Arlington 236, followed by their Carnegie classification. Denver is R1, UT Arlington R1, Milwaukee is R1. The second row is each school's enrollment. UT Arlington has a 41,000 enrollment, Milwaukee 22,000. The third row is each school's endowment. Denver has a $1 billion endowment. St. Thomas has a $667 million endowment. And here is how many MVC schools are under a 6-hour drive to each candidate. I'm using a 6-hour drive as a cutoff. That's arbitrary. Obviously, you could argue 7 or 5 or 8 or whatever. Obviously, revenue sports like men's basketball are probably flying charter, but this is for the sake of non-revenue sports. A school like Northern Kentucky, who's expected to be one of the front-runner candidates, they're within a 6-hour drive of 9 of 11 MVC schools. And now this is taking that 6-hour drive cutoff and now adding any time where an MVC school is not within that 6-hour drive. However, they're within 2 hours to an airport that has direct flights to that candidate's location. So take UT Arlington, for example, Des Moines through DSM, UNI through CID, UIC through ORD, Illinois State through BMI, Bradley through PIA, Southern through St. Louis, Valparaiso through ORD, Indiana State through IND, Evansville through EVV, Murray and Belmont through BNA, all have direct flights to DFW. It's the same story if you look at Denver. So if the MVC were to go out of market, that would help for non-revenue sports travel if they can access those schools via direct flights. Now, obviously, if there's not a direct flight, that doesn't mean they can't get there or anything. It would just be a connecting flight, but that would be a little bit of a pain. Now, putting all of that information together, here's the data for each candidate for each category. The first row is their MSA ranking. The second row is their 3-year MSA population shift, followed by the number of MVC schools with over 1% of their alumni in that MSA. Then the state's number of out-of-state college students exported then the state's percentage and rank in parentheses of U.S. out-of-state students exported, then the number of combined statistical area D1 players, then my own measurement of fertile recruiting grounds. You take the number of CSA D1 players divided by the number of teams within a 70-mile radius, or the number of teams in state that are Power 4 or Big East. The following row would be the state's percentage of U.S. Division I players in its rank, then their men's basketball budget and their rank in the EADA database, then athletic expenses minus student aid money. The number on the left is the data in the EADA database, and the number on the right is per the Knight Commission. Then 10-year KenPom, then their number of NCAA tournament appearances and wins in the 21st century, then their attendance this past season, followed by enrollment, endowment, and then their U.S. News ranking and Carnegie classification. The next row would be their athletic revenues minus football revenue. The number on the left is EADA, the number on the right is Knight Commission. The penultimate row would be the number of MVC schools within a 6-hour drive for non-revenue sports. And then the bottom row is you take that number in the above row and then add the schools where an MVC school was within 2 hours to an airport. They had a direct flight to that candidate's location. And now here is all that data color-coded. In blue means exceptional. Green is very good. Yellow would be in the middle. Orange would be below. And then red would be on the low end. You can see how a school like UT Arlington would be demographic driven, while a school like South Dakota State would be performance driven. They would need to hope that their performance would overcome their demographics. There's a lot of blue and green for UT Arlington, a lot of blue and green for St. Thomas, a lot of green for Northern Kentucky, no orange or red, a lot of green for Milwaukee, good amount of green for UMKC, but there's the performance issue. A lot of blue and green for Denver, but once again, the performance issue for them. Now we're going to run down each candidate quickly and incorporate the charts and graphs from previously in the presentation. On the left will be each school's data for each category color-coded. Then there's going to be 2 graphs, one for how I measured the fertile recruiting grounds in men's basketball. The graph on the right would be the number of out-of-state college students each state exports. And then on the bottom, those charts start with the number of MVC schools with over 1% alumni in that candidate's MSA. The second chart would be each school's attendance, both MVC and candidates. The third chart would be their men's basketball budgets. And the fourth chart would be their 10-year KenPom. First, for UT Arlington, in their favor, they're the number 4 metropolitan area with a 6% population growth over 3 years. 10 of 11 MVC schools have over 1% of their alumni in DFW. Texas exports more than double the number of out-of-state college students than the state of any other candidate. The DFW combined statistical area had 146 Division I players. The next highest CSA of any candidate was 67. The state of Texas accounts for 8% of American Division I players, which is second nationally. UTA would potentially add Bally Sports Southwest, which is Texas, Arkansas, northern Louisiana, parts of New Mexico, to the MVC's RSN coverage. UTA had a top 150 10-year KenPom, plus $18 million in athletic revenues per the Knight Commission. UT Arlington has a 41,000 enrollment, number 236 in U.S. News, and they have a Carnegie R1 research classification. DFW has direct flights near every MVC location for non-revenue sports travel. Now, working against UT Arlington is that they would require a flight for all MVC schools. Their men's basketball budget is 215th, would be last in the MVC. They have only 1 NCAA tournament appearance and only 1,777 attendance. Now looking at the Tommies, in their favor, Minnesota at number 22 is the only top 35 state with less than 3 Division I schools. So there's going to be a lot of room in the sports dollar market for them. The MSP combined statistical area has by far the most fertile men's basketball recruiting grounds when accounting for lack of in-state competition. MSP is the number 16 MSA with 0.6% population growth over 3 years. Minnesota exports the second highest, 12th nationally, out-of-state college students of the state of any candidate. UST would potentially add Bally Sports North, which covers Minnesota, North Dakota, and South Dakota, and parts of Wisconsin, to the MVC's RSN coverage. UST has great academics, number 163 in U.S. News, and the financial wealth of the school $667 million endowment. That financial wealth is also apparent in the $175 million 5,500-seat arena that opens in 2025, which will be packed with suites. And despite currently transitioning, UST's athletic revenues, after subtracting football, which is non-scholarship football, still exceed $20 million. Now, working against St. Thomas would be UST's acceptance into the NCHC and their commitment to hockey. Considering North Dakota, Denver, and Omaha, those are all big hockey schools. North Dakota, Denver, hockey blue bloods. I went to a hockey game at North Dakota end of February, and the game day environment for North Dakota would rival pretty much any college basketball game day environment I've seen. Anyway, those three schools just did St. Thomas a favor. So would St. Thomas burn those relationships so quickly? Another thing to keep in mind is that a mid-major sustaining simultaneous success in both hockey and men's basketball is very rare. St. Thomas is still transitioning, and they would require a flight for about half of the MVC schools in non-revenue sports. There's also suspicion over UST's suspected stepping stone intentions. That's just speculation. And fans have yet to demonstrate attendance for UST sports other than football. Now, they've supported football very well. The Tommy's Johnny's football rivalry for the Holy Grail was a massive draw. But in terms of men's basketball, St. Thomas only drew 1,300 attendance this season. And I believe they were below 1,000 for hockey, too. Venturing near the Ohio River, in the favor of Northern Kentucky, they're located in the number 30 MSA with 1% population growth over 3 years. The Cincinnati CSA combined with the Dayton CSA is a high producer of D1 players. Northern Kentucky would potentially add Bally Sports Ohio, which covers Ohio and parts of Pennsylvania and West Virginia. There's also parts of Kentucky, but I think that's already covered by Bally Sports South or Southeast. Anyway, those parts would be added to the MVC's RSN coverage. Northern Kentucky built one of the premier mid-major arenas in the Midwest at 64 million, 9,400 capacity. The Norse have been to 3 NCAA tournaments since 2017. They have over 3,200 attendance, 15,000 enrollment. 9 of 11 MVC schools are within a 6-hour drive. And this is where personal relationships come into play. The Northern Kentucky athletic director was previously at UNI from 2016 to 2022 and built many relationships there and throughout the MVC. Now, when you're looking at Northern Kentucky's candidacy, the 2 schools you would suspect might vote against them are Drake and UNI, just due to how far away from Northern Kentucky they are. But with that relationship with Northern Kentucky's athletic director having come from UNI, that might compel UNI not to oppose Northern Kentucky because NKU's athletic director is one of their own. She came from their family. Working against Northern Kentucky would be, while Cincinnati and Dayton are basketball crazed, that market is crowded. It's arguably oversaturated for men's basketball recruiting. And from my research looking at the website of each airport, it did not appear to me that there are direct flights between Iowa and Cincinnati, which would be important for non-revenue sports, or at least the airports didn't list those locations as available for direct flights. Heading up to MKE, in Milwaukee's favor, they're the number 40 MSA. Wisconsin is 20th in out-of-state college students exported. The Milwaukee CSA produces a decent amount of D1 players with fairly fertile recruiting grounds. Milwaukee's men's basketball budget is 130th nationally, which would be top 3 in the MVC, and they spend $960,000 more than all other candidates. Milwaukee would potentially add Bally Sports Wisconsin to the MVC's RSN coverage. Milwaukee has a history of success in the NCAA tournament in the 2000s, and they also drew really well back in the 2000s as well. You had that Bruce Pearl Sweet 16 team in 2005. They went to the Rosemont Horizon for the Sweet 16, falling to Illinois. And then the following year, Milwaukee advanced to the round of 32 under Rob Jeter. And then in 2011, under Rob Jeter, Milwaukee was the 1 seed in the Horizon League tournament and hosted Butler in the Horizon League final in a sold-out Mecca in front of over 10,000 people. Milwaukee was actually the 1 seed and Butler was the 2 seed. Butler ended up going to the national championship game. Milwaukee is impressive institutionally, 22,000 enrollment, nearly $300 million endowment, Carnegie R1. They have $18.2 million in athletic revenues per the Knight Commission, and 9 of 11 MVC schools are within a 7-hour drive for non-revenue sports, while Murray and Belmont have direct flights to Milwaukee via Nashville. Another thing I thought I typed in there, but now I see that I didn't, is that Milwaukee just opened a new, really impressive practice facility last summer. So their facilities are more impressive now than they were when they were a finalist back in 2017. Working against Milwaukee would be that they're 249th in tenure KenPom. Although they've been getting better the past couple years, their athletic director, Amanda Braun, made a good hire with Bart Lundy. Their 2,000 attendance is a little bit on the low end, and the Milwaukee metropolitan area lost about 1% population over 3 years. UMKC, who was a finalist last round, in their favor, number 31 metropolitan area with 1.3% population growth over 3 years. The state of Missouri is 19th in out-of-state college students exported. The Kansas City CSA is a big producer of D1 players with very fertile recruiting grounds. UMKC has an adequate men's basketball budget at 181st nationally. They have a 15,000 enrollment, $207 million endowment, number 269 U.S. News. They would keep the MVC in Missouri and keep the Bally Sports Kansas City and the MVC's RSN footprint if that's in question now that Missouri State is gone. And UMKC is a favorable Western market for Drake and UNI after the previous expansion tilted south and east. Working against UMKC is they've never made an NCAA tournament in over 35 years of Division I. Their tenure KenPom is 264th. Their attendance is 1,100. And the RFPs were halted for their 5,000-seat new arena next to Casey's streetcar, citing revenue generated would not cover higher than anticipated cost. And ultimately, I think that the fact that shovels are not in the ground for that new arena is what will eliminate UMKC from contention. I think their candidacy was contingent on that new arena being built. Now, a sneaky good program in Oral Roberts, in their favor, they averaged 5,400 attendance, which would be top 3 in the MVC. I went to a game there about 15 months ago, and there were legit 8,000 people there. They went to the Sweet 16 3 years ago. They have a lot of history as a program. They went to the Elite Eight all the way back in '74. They have 5 NCAA tournament appearances since 2006, and that does not include being the first team out for an at-large bid in 2012. They would potentially add Bally Sports Oklahoma to the MVC's RSN coverage. RU's fan support fits the MVC's men's basketball-oriented culture, and Tulsa is a former MVC city. ORU has an adequate men's basketball budget, 184th nationally, and Tulsa is the number 54 MSA with 3% population growth over 3 years. And the Mabee Center underwent a $25 million renovation with all new seating a few years ago. Working against Oral Roberts is the MVC's geography has shifted away from them. The closest MVC school is now over 6.5 hours away, and that alone might eliminate them since they're not in a huge market. Oklahoma ranks 32nd in out-of-state college students exported. There are 0 MVC schools with over 1% of alumni in the Tulsa metro area, and it appears only Chicago and St. Louis offer direct flights to Tulsa for non-revenue sports travel. ORU may be a tough sell at the presidential level. A school mentioned in the Extra Points newsletter, Little Rock. In Little Rock's favor, the Little Rock MSA experienced 2% population growth over 3 years. They opened a 5,600-seat arena in 2005. Won an NCAA tournament game in 2016. They would add a new state. Working against Little Rock, 0 MVC schools have over 1% of their alumni in the Little Rock MSA. Arkansas is 35th in out-of-state college students exported. Little Rock is 236th in men's basketball budget. They're also 236th in tenure KenPom, 1,600 attendance. Only 3 MVC schools are within a 6-hour drive, and only 2 more MVC schools have a direct flight for non-revenue sports that would be through O'Hare. A nearby school also mentioned in the Extra Points article was Central Arkansas. In Central Arkansas's favor would be the Little Rock MSA experienced 2% population growth over 3 years, and they would add a new state. Working against Central Arkansas is that there's no MVC schools with over 1% alumni in the Little Rock MSA. Arkansas is 35th in out-of-state college students exported. UCA is the 328th men's basketball budget, which is about half of the MVC's lowest. UCA is a 10-year KenPom of 340th. They've never made the NCAA tournament, 1,200 attendance, and they're distant from most of the MVC schools. Now Denver. In Denver's favor, the number 19 metropolitan area with 1.5% population growth over 3 years, 7 MVC schools with over 1% of their alumni in Denver, Colorado is 17th in out-of-state college students exported. Denver has the 175th men's basketball budget. They have the highest athletic budget among candidates, 13,000 enrollment, $1 billion endowment, extremely wealthy school, very good academically, 124 in U.S. News, R1 in Carnegie, and all 11 MVC schools are within 2 hours of an airport with a direct flight to Denver for non-revenue sports. Working against Denver is performance, 289th in 10-year KenPom, no NCAA tournament appearances, only 894 attendance. A mid-major sustaining simultaneous success in both hockey and men's basketball is very rare, and Denver is a hockey blue blood and a generational hockey school going all the way back to the 60s. They would also require a flight for all MVC schools. A finalist in 2017 was Omaha. In Omaha's favor, Omaha was the number 56 metropolitan area with 1.7% population growth over 3 years, the 173 men's basketball budget. They have $25 million in athletic revenues, although that's propped up by hockey. We don't know what the hockey numbers are. Omaha has a 15,000 enrollment. They're 304 in U.S. News, Carnegie R2. The $88 million 78-98 capacity Baxter Arena opened in 2015. Omaha is a favorable western market for Drake and UNI after previous expansion tilted south and east. Against Omaha's favor would be they've never made the NCAA tournament. Nebraska is 38th in out-of-state college students exported. Omaha is 268th in 10-year KenPom. There are only 3 MVC schools within a 6-hour drive. And a mid-major sustaining simultaneous success in both hockey and men's basketball is very rare, and UNO is a hockey-first school. Now into Packerland with Green Bay. Wisconsin is 20th in out-of-state college students exported. Green Bay experienced over 1% population growth over 3 years. Green Bay has 10,000 enrollment. The $45 million 9729 capacity Resch Center opened in 2002. It's located right by Lambeau Field. Some really good bars right there. And working against Green Bay would be their athletic revenues at $10.7 million. We're 345th in the EADA database. They're even lower at $10.2 million in the Knight Commission database. Green Bay is the number 161 MSA. No MVC schools have over 1% of alumni in Green Bay. The Green Bay CSA doesn't produce many D1 players. Green Bay is 261st in men's basketball budget and 233rd in 10-year KenPom. Now, a school coming off a big NCAA tournament win over Kentucky in Oakland. Oakland is in the number 14 MSA. Michigan is 18th in out-of-state college students exported, 16th in producing D1 players, 166th in 10-year KenPom. They have 4 NCAA tournament appearances since 05 with a win this year, 16,000 enrollment, $17 million in athletic revenues per the Knight Commission. They would potentially add Bally Sports Detroit to the MVC's RSN coverage. Working against Oakland would be the Detroit MSA lost over 1% population over 3 years. Only one MVC school has over 1% of their alumni in Detroit. They have the 227th men's basketball budget, and only 3 MVC schools are within a 6-hour drive. Now the University of Detroit. In Detroit's favor, the number 14 MSA, Michigan being 18th in out-of-state college students exported, Michigan being 16th in producing D1 players. University of Detroit has the 169th men's basketball budget, and every MVC school is within a 7-hour drive or within 2 hours of an airport with a direct flight to Detroit for non-revenue sports. Detroit would potentially add Bally Sports Detroit to the MVC's RSN coverage. Now, working against Detroit, they're coming off a 131 season, and that's going to automatically eliminate them. They have an 856 attendance, 265th in 10-year KenPom, 1 NCAA tournament appearance this century. The Detroit metropolitan area lost over 1% of population over 3 years. Only 1 MVC school with over 1% of alumni in Detroit, and only 4 MVC schools within a 6-hour drive. Down to Ohio with Wright State. In Wright State's favor, they have a 10-year KenPom of 140th, which would rank really well in the MVC. Their men's basketball budget would also fit in the MVC, ranked 172nd. They enjoy very solid fan support at over 4,000 attendance, and they've sustained that fan support for a very long time. Ohio is 13th in out-of-state college students exported and 11th in producing D1 players. Wright State has 3 NCAA tournament appearances since 07, and 9 of 11 schools are within a 6-hour drive of Wright State. Wright State would potentially add Bally Sports Ohio to the NBC's RSN coverage. Working against Wright State would be that they're not in a big market. It's the number 76 metropolitan area with a giant in Dayton to compete with when the presidents might want a big metropolitan area for student and player recruitment. No MVC schools have over 1% of their alumni in the Dayton metro area, albeit there are 3 in Cincinnati. Wright State's athletic revenues of $12 million would rank 338th in the EADA database, and they're even lower at $11.7 million in the Knight Commission database. There does not appear to be regular direct flights between Iowa and Cincy-Dayton for non-revenue sports. And finally, there's the Northern Kentucky roadblock. Due to Northern Kentucky's location, it's hard for Wright State to leapfrog Northern Kentucky in realignment. Wright State likely needs either expansion to 14 or Northern Kentucky getting in now to help position Wright State next time. And now the school from historic Freedom Hall, Bellarmine. Louisville is the number 43 MSA, has somewhat fertile recruiting grounds. Kentucky is 21st in producing D1 players. Bellarmine is 280 in U.S. News, and 9 of 11 MVC schools are within a 6-hour drive. Working against Bellarmine, Kentucky is 28th in out-of-state college students exported. Bellarmine is 254th in 10-year KenPom. Also new to D1, they're also coming off an 8-23 season. So being 8-23 and being new to D1, probably not in the cards for them. And they have a low enrollment at 3,000. Now the Colonels of Eastern Kentucky, their athletic revenues of $18.2 million, even after subtracting football, are on the higher end of all the candidates per the Knight Commission. They have good fan support, over 3,000 attendance, 15,000 enrollment, 3 NCAA tournaments since 2005. Working against Eastern Kentucky is mostly their location. They're in a micropolitan statistical area. They are 35 minutes from Lexington, but Lexington itself is only the number 169 MSA. There are no MVC schools with over 1% of alumni in Lexington. Kentucky is 28th in out-of-state college students exported. The Lexington CSA is not a big producer of D1 players, and EKU has the 244th men's basketball budget. Now the Governors out of Austin Peay. In their favor, Clarksville saw 6% population growth over 3 years. Tennessee is 21st in out-of-state college students exported. Tennessee is 14th in producing D1 players. Austin Peay's athletic revenues of $18.7 million, even after subtracting football, is on the higher end of candidates per the Knight Commission. Being 1 hour from Nashville, it's easy for most MVC schools to either drive or board a direct flight to BNA. Working against Austin Peay, they're already an MVC school with 1 hour in each direction with Murray and Belmont, so it doesn't really give the MVC new territory. Clarksville is only the 159 MSA, and any demographic benefits offered by being 1 hour from Nashville already offered via Belmont being located directly in Nashville. Clarksville doesn't produce many D1 players. Austin Peay has the 243rd men's basketball budget and 257th in 10-year KenPom. Now, probably the best basketball program on the board in South Dakota State. In their favor, 101st in 10-year KenPom, which ranks second in the MVC. 7 NCAA tournaments since 2012, which would lead the MVC. And after subtracting football, South Dakota State still has the highest athletic budget aside from Denver and Omaha, and Omaha's is lifted due to hockey. South Dakota State has an 11,000 enrollment, $232 million endowment, number 296 in U.S. News and Carnegie R2. So working in favor of South Dakota State is everything that South Dakota State can control, so they're doing everything right. Now working against South Dakota State is everything South Dakota State has no control over. That is their location. They're in a micropolitan statistical area, 1 hour from Sioux Falls, which is still only the 171 MSA. There are no MVC schools with over 1% of alumni in Sioux Falls. South Dakota is 47th in out-of-state college students exported. South Dakota is 44th in producing D1 players. Only 2 MVC schools are within a 6-hour drive, and it appears that only O'Hare flies direct to Sioux Falls, which would be important for non-revenue sports. In reality, I'm not even sure South Dakota State would be interested. They're probably best off capitalizing on the Sioux Falls Summit League tournament and keep going to the NCAA tournament because eventually they'll break through. And they can also maintain their Dakota rivalries, which are big for engagement of fans and alumni in the Dakotas. In Lindenwood's favor is the number 23 metropolitan area. 7 MVC schools have over 1% of alumni in the St. Louis MSA. Missouri is 19th in out-of-state college students exported. St. Louis is a decent producer of Division I players. Lindenwood has a $204 million endowment. All 11 MVC schools are within a 6-hour drive of St. Louis. And against Lindenwood's favor is that they have the 354th men's basketball budget. That is only about 1/3 of the MVC's lowest men's basketball budget. That alone is going to eliminate them. They're 361st in tenure Ken Pom. Obviously, they've only been D1 for 2 years. They're transitioning, 1,200 attendance. St. Louis lost almost 1% of population over 3 years. And Lindenwood plays D1 hockey, a mid-major sustaining simultaneous success in both hockey and men's basketball is very rare. It's just way too early in Lindenwood's athletic development right now. Now, South Dakota State, with a 10-year Ken Pom that would be second in the MVC and 7 NCAA tournament appearances since 2012, along with Oral Roberts, who has 5 bids since 2006, was the first team out in 2012, went to Sweet 16 in 21, Elite 8 way back in 74, and their attendance, which ranked top 3 in the MVC. Those are likely the 2 best programs on the board when considering performance and then fan support in ORU's case. But both schools are probably non-starters at getting 9 of 11 votes at the presidential level. Ultimately, I would be shocked if whoever the MVC added was a school outside of these 5. I think the front runners are UT Arlington, St. Thomas, and Northern Kentucky. And what's going to make this fun is that all 3 of them have very similar odds. So it's going to be a bit of a free-for-all in trying to predict this. Milwaukee is a dark horse to keep an eye on, and Wright State is a long shot, but they're strong enough in so many areas that you have to keep an eye on them. I'm not going to rehash everything, but here are the 5 schools, everything that I listed in their favor and against their favor, and then their data for all those categories color-coded to the left. And then on the bottom, there's graphs and charts for number of out-of-state college students each state exported, number of MVC schools with over 1% of alumni in each MSA, then attendance, men's basketball budget, 10-year Ken Pom. If you're in Vegas and the bookie gives you these deals, which one are you taking? Northern Kentucky, 5-3 odds. UT Arlington, 3-1 odds. St. Thomas, 4-1 odds. No expansion at 9-1 odds. Expansion to 14 at 24-1 odds. Milwaukee at 49-1 odds. Wright State at 99-1 odds. Or anyone else at 199-1 odds. Now, these odds, they're just for fun. Don't take them too seriously. Data leads me to believe that Northern Kentucky, UT Arlington, and St. Thomas all have really good shots, and Milwaukee and Wright State have outside shots. But my gut tells me that the 12th MVC school will be Northern Kentucky.